You type a URL into your browser. You hit enter. A few seconds later, a web page appears on your screen. You've done this thousands of times, probably without thinking about it. But behind that simple action is a surprisingly complex chain of events involving dozens of machines and multiple protocols working in perfect harmony across the internet. So, what actually happens when you type a URL and press enter? Let's break it down. First, you need to understand what a URL actually is. Take something like https://www.reddit.com/r/videos. That URL has three main parts. The HTTPS at the beginning is the protocol. It tells your computer how to communicate with the server. The www.reddit.com part is the domain name, which identifies which website you're trying to reach, and /r/videos is the path, specifying exactly what resource you want from that website. Now, your browser has a problem. To actually connect to Reddit's server, it needs an IP address, something like 151.101.65.140. But you typed in reddit.com, which is way easier to remember but completely useless for making an actual connection. This is where DNS comes in. DNS stands for Domain Name System, and its job is to translate human-readable domain names into machine-readable IP addresses. When you type in that URL, your browser immediately needs to figure out what IP address corresponds to reddit.com. It might already know the answer. Your browser caches recent DNS lookups so it doesn't have to ask every single time. Your operating system does the same thing. But if this is your first time visiting the site in a while, your computer has to actually go ask. It sends out a DNS query, essentially a question that says, what's the IP address for reddit.com? This query gets sent to a DNS server, which might forward it to other DNS servers in a hierarchy until someone has the answer. Then the response comes back. Reddit.com is at 151.1.01.65.140. Your browser now has what it needs to make a connection. So your browser takes that IP address and establishes a TCP connection. TCP is a protocol that creates a reliable connection between your computer and the server. It works through what's called a three-way handshake. Your computer sends a packet that says synchronize. The server responds with synchronize acknowledge. Your computer finishes with acknowledge. At this point, both sides know the other exists and is ready to communicate. The connection is established. Now your browser can actually ask for the thing you wanted. It sends an HTTP request over that TCP connection. The request looks something like get/r/videos http/1.1, along with some additional information like which host you're trying to reach and what kind of data you can accept. This message gets packaged into packets and sent across the internet to Reddit's server. When the server receives your request, it parses it, figures out what you're asking for, and does whatever it needs to do. Maybe it's loading a file. Maybe it's querying a database. Maybe it's running some complicated back-end logic to assemble the page dynamically. Whatever it is, the server eventually creates a response, usually an HTML document, and wraps it in an HTTP response message. Something like http:/1.1200OK with a content type of text/HTML and the actual HTML content in the body. That response gets sent back to your browser, which parses it and starts rendering the HTML. But it's not done yet. That HTML probably references other resources, CSS files to style the page, JavaScript files to make it interactive, images to display, fonts to load. Each of those requires another request. Your browser fires off more DNS lookups if needed, establishes more connections, sends more HTTP requests, receives more responses. A single web page can easily trigger dozens or even hundreds of these requests. And this is happening constantly all over the internet, billions of times a day. When you click refresh because the page isn't loading, you're potentially triggering all of this again. Sometimes that helps because maybe the first request got lost or the server was temporarily overwhelmed. Sometimes it just makes things worse by adding more load to an already struggling server. The whole system is incredibly resilient, but also incredibly complex. There are caches at multiple layers to speed things up. There are load balancers distributing traffic across many servers. There are CDNs storing copies of content closer to users. Behind that, Simple domain name you typed is probably not just one server, but hundreds or thousands of machines working together. So the next time you type a URL and a web page instantly appears, remember that you just orchestrated a symphony of protocols, servers, and network infrastructure spanning the entire planet. You asked a question, and the internet answered. Pretty wild when you think about it.